I'm sorry, sweetheart. Are you lost? This is a private competition, only for our registered students. I think maybe your mother is looking for you. She said it with a smile, the soft, sorry-for-you kind of smile, and she put one manicured hand on the shoulder of an 11-year-old girl in a dress that had belonged to 3 other girls before her, and she began gently, firmly to turn the child around, to steer her back across the marble lobby of the great concert hall, toward the tall doors, toward the street, and behind the little girl, an old woman in her good church coat. The child's grandmother opened her mouth to say something and could not find the words fast enough, because the words she wanted were the kind you spend a whole life swallowing. The girl did not move. She looked up at the elegant woman with the clipboard, and she said very quietly but very clearly, "I'm not lost. I'm registered, number 14. My name is Nia Dixon. I'm here to play." And a woman standing nearby, a competition mother in pearls, with a son in a blazer that cost more than the girl's grandmother made in a week, let out a small, soft laugh, the kind meant to be overheard, and said to no one and to everyone, "Oh, bless her heart. Somebody really should have told her what this costs. Have you ever watched an entire room decide that a child did not belong before she had said a single word? Have you ever loved something with your whole heart and had it laughed at by people who never once in their lives had to fight for anything? In 11 minutes, that little girl in the second-hand dress was going to sit down at a 9-foot concert grand piano in front of the people who had just laughed at her, and she was going to play a piece of music that no one in that hall had heard in over a decade. And one of the most feared and revered old men in the world of classical music was going to rise slowly, unsteadily to his feet on the jury, with tears running openly down his face, because he was going to recognize it. Stay with me. You are going to want to be in that hall when Nia Dixon puts her hands on the keys. Her name was Nia Dixon. She was 11 years old, and she was, though not one person in that lobby could have imagined it, one of the most naturally gifted musicians any of them would ever be in the same room with. Let me take you back, because a gift like Nia's does not come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. It comes from someone. Nia lived with her grandmother, a woman named Odessa Dixon, in a 2-room apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator had not worked since before Nia was born. Odessa was 68 years old, and she cleaned office buildings at night downtown. The tall glass ones with the marble lobbies not so different from the one Nia was standing in now. Odessa left the apartment at 9 each evening and came home at 5 each morning. And in between, she pushed a cart and emptied the trash cans of people who never saw her face, who stepped around her in the hallways the way you step around a piece of furniture. She had been doing it for 30 years. Her back was bared, and her hands were worse, and she never once complained where the child could hear it, because Odessa Dixon had learned a long time ago that complaining is a luxury, and she was raising a granddaughter on wages that did not have room for luxuries. She was raising that granddaughter alone, because of the hole in the middle of their little family, and the hole had a name. And the name was Camille. Camille Dixon was Odessa's daughter, and Nia's mother, and by every account of every person who ever heard her play, Camille was something close to a miracle. She'd started picking out melodies on a neighbor's piano when she was 4. By 10, she was playing things that made grown musicians stop and stare. And Camille had done the impossible thing, the thing that does not happen to poor black girls from that neighborhood, or is not supposed to. At 18, she had auditioned for a full scholarship to the most prestigious classical music conservatory in the region, a gilded old institution called the Hartwell Conservatory, and she had won it. She had walked into that gilded old building, the most gifted student they had seen in a generation, and for 1 year she had been the brightest thing in it, and then Camille got pregnant. At 19, with Nia and the scholarship, it turned out had a great many conditions. An understanding was not one of them. There was no support, no path back, no one at that gilded institution who looked at the most talented student they had and thought, let us find a way to keep her. There was only a polite letter and a closed door, and a young woman back out on the street with a baby coming, and a gift no one would ever pay to hear again. Camille went to work. She cleaned houses. She waited tables. She played when she could, on a battered upright piano her mother bought for $40 at a church sale, and on that $40 piano, in the two-room apartment, she wrote one piece of music, her own. She wrote it slowly over 3 years, in the cracks of an exhausting life, and she wrote it for her daughter, and at the top of the handwritten pages she put 4 words. For my Nia always. Camille never got to finish teaching it to her. When Nia was 3 years old, Camille Dixon was killed by a driver who ran a red light on her way home from a double shift. And the brightest thing the Hartwell Conservatory had ever turned away went out, just like that at 22. So Odessa buried her daughter, and she took in her granddaughter, and she kept the $40 piano, because she could not bear to sell the last thing her daughter's hands had touched. And she watched over the years with the feeling she could barely hold in her chest as the same miracle began to happen all over again. Because Nia, at 4, started picking out melodies. By 6, she was playing things that made grown-ups stop and stare. She was her mother, come back. She had the same hands, the same ear, the same way of closing her eyes and disappearing into the sound. And Odessa Dixon made herself a promise over that $40 piano, a fierce and desperate promise. Not this one. This one does not get turned away. This one they are going to have to hear. Remember that promise. It is the reason a 68-year-old woman with a bad back was standing in a marble lobby that morning, being laughed at by a woman in pearls. Nia taught herself mostly off her mother's old sheet music and a stack of scores from the public library and videos on a cracked second-hand phone. A kind old church organist named Mr. Elrod gave her free lessons on Saturday mornings when he saw what she was, and told Odessa plainly that in 50 years of teaching he had never had a student like this child, and that Odessa needed to find her a real teacher and a real stage, because a gift like that was not really theirs to keep. It belonged to the world. The world just did not know it yet. Above all, Nia played the piece, her mother's piece. For my Nia always. She had found the handwritten pages in a shoebox when she was 7, and she had taught herself every note, and she played it the way other children say their prayers, every night on the $40 piano in the two-room apartment, until she knew it better than she knew her own face. It was the only piece of her mother she had. Her mother had left her a song instead of a memory, and Nia had decided a long time ago that she would learn to play it so beautifully that it would be like her mother was still in the room. When Odessa heard about the Hartwell Prize, the conservatory's annual scholarship competition open to any child in the region, she almost did not enter Nia. She knew what places like that thought of children like Nia. She had cleaned enough of their lobbies to know. But Mr. Elrod pushed, and the entry was free, and there was a full scholarship on the line. The same scholarship, the very same one, that had once opened its doors to Camille and then quietly closed them. Odessa filled out the form with a shaking hand. She did not tell the conservatory that the girl's mother had once been their brightest student. She did not think they would remember. She was right about that, and she was wrong about how much it would matter. They spent the last of the grocery money on the registration and on a dress. A second-hand dress, pale yellow, 3 girls old, but clean and pressed with love the night before, on an ironing board in the two-room apartment. And on the morning of the competition, Odessa Dixon put on her good church coat. And she took her granddaughter's hand, and the two of them rode 2 buses across the city to the gilded old building. And they walked up the marble steps and through the tall doors into the lobby, into a sea of blazers and pearls and private tutors and the smell of old money. And every single person in that lobby looked at them and decided in one glance exactly who they were and exactly how little they were worth. That is where Vivian Langley found them. Vivian Langley was the competition coordinator. A polished woman with a clipboard and a headset and a very specific idea of what a Hartwell child looked like, and a poor black girl in a second-hand dress holding the hand of an old woman in a worn coat did not fit the picture in her head. She did not stop to check the picture in her head against the two people in front of her. Almost nobody ever does. That is the whole mechanism of the thing. She simply moved to correct what she assumed was a mistake, a lost child, a wandered-in stranger. And she put her hand on Nia's shoulder and told her sweetly that this was a private event and her mother was probably looking for her. And when Nia said, "I'm registered, number 14. My name is Nia Dixon. I'm here to play," Vivian Langley's smile tightened, and she looked down at her clipboard. And there was the name, right there, number 14, Nia Dixon. And something crossed her face that was not quite an apology, because an apology would have meant admitting she had been wrong, out loud, in front of the parents in pearls. So she did what people do when they are cornered by their own assumptions. She doubled down. She said, "Well, this is a very serious competition, dear, for children who have trained for years with professional instructors." She said it loud enough for the lobby. "I just want to make sure you understand that before you get up there. We wouldn't want you to be embarrassed." And the woman in pearls, whose son was number 12, laughed her soft, overheard laugh and murmured something about how the scholarship really ought to go to a student who could make something of it, not a charity case, and a few of the other parents smiled into their coffee, and the comment traveled the lobby like a small, cold permission. Now it was not just Vivian Langley against the child. It was the room. Odessa Dixon felt something rise up in her throat that she had spent 30 years learning to swallow. But she looked at her granddaughter's face, and she saw the thing she was most afraid of. She saw Nia beginning to believe them, because that is what those glances do to a child. Nia had walked in that morning carrying her mother's song in her hands like a candle, and in the space of 90 seconds, a lobby full of strangers had very nearly blown it out. Her shoulders had started to curl inward. Her chin had started to drop. She had started to become smaller, the way a child does when a room tells her she is too small to be there. And here is the moment I think about the most. Not the reveal. The reveal is coming, and it is everything you want it to be. This one first, because Odessa took Nia by the hand and pulled her out of that lobby, down a side hallway, into a quiet corner by a water fountain, away from the pearls and the clipboards, and she knelt down in front of her granddaughter, her bad knees screaming, so that she was eye to eye with the child. And Nia's eyes were full and about to spill, and Nia said the thing that broke the old woman's heart clean in two. She said, "Grandma, they don't want us here. Let's just go home. I don't want to play anymore." And Odessa Dixon, 68 years old, who cleaned marble lobbies at night and had buried the most gifted person she ever knew, took her granddaughter's face in both of her worn hands. And she did not tell her the world was fair, because it was not. And she did not tell her those people were wrong to be cruel, though they were. She told her the truth instead. She said, "Baby, I need you to listen to me. Your mama sat right where those people are sitting, right in this building. She was the best they ever had, and when she needed them, they turned her around and walked her out that same door. She let that land, and your mama wrote you a song. She wrote it on a $40 piano with a baby on her hip, and she called it Your Name. Now those people out there, they already decided who you are. They decided it before you opened your mouth, same as they did to your mama." Odessa's voice did not shake. "So you have got two choices, baby. You can believe them and walk out that door and let them be right about you the way they were right about your mama. Or you can go out there and you can sit down at that piano and you can play your mama's song so beautifully that every single one of them has to sit there and understand exactly what they almost threw away." She wiped the child's tears with her thumb. "You don't play for them, Nia. You never play for them. You play for her. Now, are you going to let them turn a Dixon around one more time?" And Nia Dixon, 11 years old, looked at her grandmother, and something in her small face changed. The candle steadied. She stood up straight. She said, "No, Grandma." And Odessa said, "That's right." And the two of them walked back into the hall. The competition ran all morning. One by one, the children of privilege took the stage. And they were good, some of them very good. The products of years of expensive lessons and stern professional tutors, and they played their difficult, showy pieces with cold precision, and the jury nodded, and the parents applauded for their own, and it was exactly what everyone expected it to be. The head of that jury was an old man named Harold Weiss, and if you know anything about that world, you know that name. Harold Weiss was a legend, a concert pianist who had played every great hall on earth, a teacher who had shaped a generation of musicians, a man of 74 with a reputation for a stare that could wither a prodigy at 40 paces. He had heard 10,000 children play. Almost nothing moved him anymore. He sat at the center of the jury table with his chin on his folded hands and his eyes half closed, and he waited, without much hope, to be surprised. They called number 14, Nia Dixon. You could feel the lobby's judgment follow her onto that stage. She looked so small crossing it, a little girl in a pale yellow second-hand dress walking toward a 9-foot concert grand that could have swallowed her whole. Somewhere in the seats, the woman in pearls whispered something to another mother, and they both smiled. Vivian Langley stood at the side of the stage, with her clipboard held to her chest, already a little smug, already composing the gentle, condescending thing she would say when it was over. In the front row, an old woman in a good church coat sat with her worn hands folded in her lap, and her lips were moving, though no sound came out. Nia climbed up onto the bench. Her feet barely reached the pedals. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed. And the great hall waited, half of it already certain of what was coming. A poor child in over her head. A few uncomfortable minutes. A polite scattering of applause. A charity case sent quietly home. Then Nia Dixon put her hands on the keys, and she began to play her mother's song. And the hall went silent in a way it had not been silent all morning, because it was not showy. It was not cold. It was not the sound of a child performing difficulty for a jury. From the very first phrase, it was something else entirely. It was aching and tender and impossibly mature, a melody that seemed to come from a place much older than 11 years. And it filled that gilded old hall the way water fills a cup all the way to the brim, until there was no room left in it for anything but the music. The children who had played before her had played at the audience. Nia was not playing at anyone. She had her eyes closed, and she was somewhere else. Somewhere the pearls and the clipboards could not follow, and she was playing. Exactly as her grandmother told her, for her mother. And the whole hall was simply allowed to listen in on a conversation between a girl and a ghost. The smile fell off the face of the woman in pearls. Vivian Langley's clipboard slowly lowered to her side, and at the center of the jury table, old Harold Weiss, who had heard 10,000 children play and had not truly been surprised in 20 years, slowly opened his eyes, because Harold Weiss knew this piece. He had heard it exactly once before, more than a dozen years ago, in a practice room in this very building, played by an 18-year-old girl who was the most gifted student he had ever taught. A girl he had believed, privately, would change the whole art form. A girl who had vanished from his life 1 year later, without a word, and whom he had wondered about. Guiltily, in quiet moments for over a decade, he had never known what happened to her. He had never known where she went. He had never heard this melody again, this unfinished, aching thing she had been writing. And he had assumed, with the particular grief of a teacher who fails a student, that he never would. And now it was pouring out of an 11-year-old girl in a second-hand dress on his stage. Harold Weiss rose to his feet. He did not mean to. The other jurors looked at him in alarm. He stood at the jury table with his hand pressed over his mouth and tears running freely down the deep lines of his 74-year-old face. And he watched this child play the ghost of a song he had carried for 13 years. And when Nia finished, when the last note faded up into the gold ceiling of that hall, and the silence came rushing back in, Harold Weiss was the first person on his feet, and his voice, when he found it, Cracked all the way through, child, he said into the silence. And the whole hall turned to look at him, because Harold Weiss did not speak to competitors. Ever, child, where did you learn that piece? And Nia Dixon, on the bench, her feet not reaching the pedals, looked out at the weeping old legend and said simply, "My mother wrote it. She wrote it for me." And Harold Weiss said, in barely more than a whisper, "And what is your mother's name?" "Her name was Camille Dixon," Nia said. "She went to school here. A long time ago. She died when I was 3. The sound that came out of Harold Weiss was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when 13 years of guilt and grief and wondering all arrive at once. And he came out from behind that jury table, and he walked up onto the stage, this towering, terrifying legend. And he knelt down in front of an 11-year-old girl in a second-hand dress, and he took her small hands in his old ones, the hands that had just played his lost student's song, and he said, "I taught your mother. I taught your mother, and she was the finest musician I ever knew, and I have wondered every single day for 13 years what became of her. And I am so sorry. I'm so sorry that this place did not fight for her." And then he looked up, past the child, out into that hall full of pearls and blazers and comfortable people, and his voice was not soft anymore. It was the voice of a lion. "This girl," he said, "is the daughter of the most gifted student this conservatory ever had, and this conservatory turned her mother away. And an hour ago, I am told, some of you tried to turn this child away too." He let that sit in the terrible silence. "You should be ashamed, every one of you who laughed. You were laughing at the closest thing to genius that has walked into this building in 20 years. You could hear people crying now, all over the hall. And in the front row, an old woman in a good church coat had both hands pressed over her mouth, and her shoulders were shaking, because Odessa Dixon had kept her promise. This one they had to hear. And they heard. The consequences arrived in the order such things do. There was no vote to take. Harold Weiss announced from the stage, his hand still holding Nia's, that the Hartwell Prize, the full scholarship, was hers, and that he would be honored to teach her himself, personally, for as long as she would have him. And the hall rose to its feet in an ovation that went on and on, some of it applause and some of it apology, the way it always is when a room is trying to say sorry with its hands for what its silence allowed. Vivian Langley was not seen at the reception. Vivian Langley, who had tried to walk a genius out the front door, found within the week that the coordinator of a competition does not survive being the woman in the video, because, of course, there was a video. There is always a video now, a dozen of them. A poor black girl in a second-hand dress silencing an elite hall with her dead mother's song while a legend wept. And it was watched by the next morning, more times than that gilded old building had held people in its entire history. The woman in pearls, whose son did not win, went home to explain to that son why the family did not talk about the video that everyone at his school had seen. But none of that was the part that mattered. The part that mattered was quieter. The Hartwell Conservatory, forced to look at itself in the pitiless light of that video, went back into its own records, and it found the file of a student named Camille Dixon, admitted on full scholarship as the most promising talent of her year. Withdrawn 1 year later, no support offered, no exception made, and the institution had to sit with the truth of what it had thrown away. Within the year, there was a new fund at that conservatory for gifted students facing hardship, so that no other Camille would ever again be handed a polite letter and a closed door. And they named the fund the Camille Dixon Fellowship. Her name is carved into the wall of that gilded lobby now, the lobby her daughter was almost turned out of, in gold letters, where every child who walks in can see it. The brightest thing they ever turned away is the first name you see when you enter. Nia asked for that. It was the only thing she asked for, and Nia Dixon studied under Harold Weiss for the rest of his life. He gave her for free, in the last good years of his teaching, everything he had, and he said more than once, to anyone who would listen, that he was not teaching her so much as trying to make up for a debt he owed her mother, and that in any case the child had less to learn from him than he had feared, because most of it was already in her hands, put there by a woman on a $40 piano who ran out of time. The $40 piano still sits in the 2-room apartment, by the way. Nia could have a concert grand now. She keeps the old upright. It is the one her mother's hands touched, and her mother's song lives in the wood of it. And Nia says she plays better on it than on any 9-foot Steinway in any gold hall in the world. Because on that piano she is never playing alone. Here is what stays with me about this one. Nia Dixon walked into that building carrying everything she needed to prove who she was. It was in her hands the entire time, and a lobby full of people looked at a second-hand dress and an old coat, and decided the whole story before she played a single note. The exact same way, in the exact same building, that they had decided her mother's story a dozen years before. The proof was right there. They just could not be bothered to let her show it, because they had already made up their minds. It took a dead woman's song played by her orphaned daughter to make them finally listen. That is almost always how it works. Not with a mob, with a soft laugh and a hand on a child's shoulder, and a comfortable room full of decent people who see a thing that is wrong and wait, each of them, for someone braver to go first. Only this time, the someone braver was 11 years old, and she went first at a piano. In the end, I made Nia and Camille up. But I did not invent the child in the wrong clothes, who is smarter than everyone in the room, and gets told, with a smile, that she is probably lost. That happens every single day, in lobbies and classrooms and offices all over the world, to children carrying candles that a careless glance almost blows out. A lot of you were that child, and a lot of you have been in that lobby too, holding your coffee, watching the hand come down on the small shoulder, feeling that something was wrong, and waiting to see if anyone else would say it first. So let me ask you honestly, if you had been in that hall, and you saw them laughing at the little girl in the second-hand dress, would you have smiled into your coffee, or would you have been the one who said, "Let the child play"? And whose candle is right in front of you right now, small and steady and almost overlooked, waiting for one person to finally stop and shield it from the wind? Tell me below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who was ever told they did not belong in the room they were born to be in, and remind them that the truth is patient and that some songs are worth crossing a whole life to finish.